I'll give everyone another second.
There are a lot of people. 242.
Damn, 200 people. Wow.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this panel for Bookstore Romance Day. And this is the History and Color panel with a whole group of wonderful authors. So we have Vanessa Riley, Adriana and Beverly Jenkins, Diana Quincy, and Emily Howard.
Good job.
I do try. Words are hard. Speaking is hard. Anyways, I will jump right into the questions I have for these amazing authors. So my first question is, what has been the most interesting fact or story that you've come upon through your research?
How are we answering? Are you going to pick someone to start?
Yeah, us.
But I'll just go with the order that's on my screen here. Vanessa, you can go first.
The most interesting thing that I've discovered is that there is so much in the historical newspapers about how the world really was, how diverse it was, how much upward mobility there was for women of color, for Black women. And it astonishes me how in present day, it's like we're all blind to this. We're all, for a while, the world has changed again, thank God. But to not know this, to accept the 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice as the ultimate history of all of what happened in the past. And so it just amazes me the things that are readily, easily to discover without having to crawl in archives, but yet no one knows it.
And Adriana, you can go next.
I mean, probably similarly. I think for me, because my characters, or at least my heroines in this series, are all from like Afro-Caribbean, so they're from like Spanish-speaking Caribbean. I grew up in the Caribbean, so I knew that we had been there for a while and that there was history. Like Santo Domingo, which is where I grew up, was like the first city in the Americas. There's history everywhere you go in that city. So I was well aware that we had been there for hundreds of years and things had been happening for centuries. But it's just been interesting, like discovering a little bit more of the mobility of like people who, because my books are set in Paris, and right now I'm writing a lesbian romance. So it's a Latina artist and a Duchess who's half Latina. She's half Chilean. And it's been really fascinating just to see how like publicly gay women were at that time in 1889. Like in mine is set around the Exposición Universal in Paris, and there were like literally a dozen women who were openly gay who had pieces presented at the exposition. Some of them won medals, and like they were living with their partners, and it wasn't really like a secret or anything like that. So it's just been interesting to read. Like we have this sense that everything that happened in queer life was like in the shadows, and it doesn't take a really like deep Google search to find that in Paris in 1889, women were living together as partners, and it like was not a thing that people would be like put in jail for or anything like that. So it's just like interesting to see how easy it is, like Vanessa said, to find that people were having these like pretty vibrant lives.
That's so interesting. And Beverly?
I found that Dr. Benjamin Quarles, he's passed away years ago, devoted his life to the history of African Americans in this country, and that he covered every aspect from the Revolutionary War to Black abolitionists, to the Civil War. And of course, the books were called The Negro in the Civil War back then. But just how many things he found and how much he kept for us to go back and find. And that most of the books that I've gotten from him have been kicked out of libraries, given away. And, and I know that librarians have to make space. That's not the issue. But to take something so valuable and just put it on a used bookshelf or the used book table with the friends of the library table to be purchased for 50 cents has benefited me. I'm snatching them up wherever I can find them. But just how thorough he was, and that information is there. So I'm gonna shut up now.
Diana?
Well, I'm Arab American, and when I first started writing, I was writing straight white characters. I didn't think there was any room for characters of Arab descent. And certainly any Arab characters you see depicted in popular culture, for the most part, are terrorists or wife beaters or women who are submissive and, forced to wear a scarf and all those kinds of things. So I really wanted to, with the series I just finished, to explore characters of Arab descent. And so it was not easy, actually, to find Arabs in the Regency era. They did exist, we know that. But it was hard to find the material, especially in English, and I don't read Arabic. So, but we do know, there was a record that there were many Arab traders. There was something like 80 Arab trading houses around 1800 in Manchester, and they were exporting English cotton to the Middle East. So it's been, and I do feel that at the back of my books, in the acknowledgments, I tell people where I found my sources, because there's always the doubters out there who assume it was straight white Christian, straight literally. So I put those in the back, and I put my sources in the back, and just Google and being able to see these old books, these in Google Books, to see has been amazing. Now I'm working on a new series, and this is Arabs in America. So there was so many more sources because they're in English. And a lot of the sources are in the New York Times, Time Machine. So there are a lot of old articles describing the Arab neighborhoods. So that's been fascinating to me. And it's led me, those articles have led me to materials in the Library of Congress. And so I'm still learning, and that's a community in America that also did not really document itself. It was more of an oral tradition. And so there are people really in the 80s who really started trying to document using census material, and all that has been fascinating.
Amelie,
yeah. Everything that everyone said is, on point. I often talk about Sophia Duleep Singh, who was a princess of color in Queen Victoria's court, and she is the inspiration for one of my stories. But the really neat thing that I discovered in my research is her sister, Catherine Duleep Singh, was lived as a lesbian and a person of color in the 1860s with her partner and governess Lena for years. So, this kind of, I want to call it like willing erasure of people of color and LGBTQ plus IA people. We were there, and we're asking different questions, and we're getting different answers. In the past, we had people of a certain, I always say there's a quote by Robespierre that history is fiction, or history is, and the thought that history is written by the victors. And that's to some extent very true. I think now that, people of color, we're asking different questions about the past, we're going to get answers that match that now. We were there in art, we were there in, in the historical papers that Vanessa talked about, as Adriana talked about as well. we were there.
No, definitely, as all the authors said, definitely always read the author's note because you learn so much. And I know for me personally, I love to go down the trails of learning more after finishing being a part of the story of these different characters. So my next question is, what made you want to write historical romance? Was there a particular story you heard or read, or what was your process? And anyone can answer. You can start. Whoever wants to go first.
For me, it was the first thing that sold. Yeah, and there was nothing in the marketplace that was like my stuff. So, and when Toni Morrison said, if there's a story out there that you want to read and it's not out there, then you got to write it yourself. So I'd always loved a good love story. And like I said, I was writing for me. I wasn't writing for publication. I sort of stumbled into this. So, but it was the first thing that sold.
I was blatantly writing for publication.
I ain't mad at you.
I was blatant. I wanted, as a kid growing up in the South, sometimes we don't have all the books that everybody else has. And fortunately for me, my mom, she kept us in, Thoreau and Shakespeare and all these sorts of things. That's not really good bedtime stories. So it was a pleasure when I got to college and could go to bookstores and get Beverly Jenkins and get all these little signet Regency romances. And, then I remember back reading Sandition, Jane Austen's book where the woman of color is the richest woman in the book.
Yeah.
And I was like, where are these stories? And so I wanted these out there. It was a quest. It's been a long quest, and but I want to see these books on shelves. I, as a little girl, would have loved to have my princess moment and not have to imagine so difficultly my face being there, because my face was there. The ancestors are there and dancing in balls and having the same foolishness and fun and finding their forevers, and it needed to be on the shelf. So I was very intentional. Thank the Lord that it all worked out, because at times it didn't look like it was going to work out at all. Yeah. I thank Beverly, because she was one of those like, you need to put an author's note in the back of your book. Because I think I had gotten some really horrible, that didn't happen, wasn't there, yada, yada, yada. And Beverly has a way of lifting people up when they're at their lowest. And she was like, put out the note. It's going to solve all your problems. And she is so right, because people don't understand. And sometimes the Google, I guess, doesn't work.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Or they don't know how to make it work.
They don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
They Google what they want to see.
Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Well, I don't have a fabulous story. I don't have a fabulous story. I came to romance very late. I think I was maybe 40. And I picked up a romance, and I was just like, I used to work in a newsroom. Well, I worked Sunday night. Sunday night, if football was on, you worked late. There was a lot of downtime. And somebody had sent a romance to the morning producer. So I picked it up, and it was a Julia Quinn book. And I borrowed it and took it home and devoured it. And then I ended up, I think that summer I read, maybe 80 romance books. I just devoured them all. And I thought, I was just moved to write them. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know any of the rules of romance. And I learned from editors who told me what the heroes can and can't do with and without the heroine. So it just came to me late. I started reading them. I fell in love with them. And I thought, maybe I can write one of these. And I did. And I submitted the second one I wrote. And the third one I wrote is the one that sold, and then they picked up the whole series. So, I write mysteries too, but that's how I got into it.
I'll go next. I started out in YA, so a little bit differently. But I always, stole my grandma's romances because that's what I love to read. I was obsessed with the 4Js, Jude Devereaux, Julie Garwood, Judith McNaught, and Joanna Lindsay. And I would read those any chance I got. I mean, my copies in my shelf, like the spines are broken, stuck together with tape because I read them so many times. And later on in my career, I actually started historical romance with a co-writer, Angie Morgan. And it was so great to write with her because we were both sharing our love of this, of historical romance, and then putting our own words down on the page. And then at the end of it, it was just a fun project. And we decided to see if we could, get our agents to publish it, to sell it, sorry. And they were able to. So that was off to the races. But yeah, I love writing romance. I love writing historical romance. I think just that whole era to me, in terms of like the women's movement and women always being able to, subvert the rules or bend the rules to get what they wanted, is very powerful to me. And I feel it's a message that can transcend to, the modern era quite easily. And also, I want to be a brown girl in a ball gown. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, same. I started reading historical romance, was how I came to romance, and it was like early, like I was like maybe 12. And I was like really obsessed with also like with Edith Wharton, like, and I just loved the aesthetic of that time. And so, but I didn't really, again, I didn't know that that could be a thing I could do, like back in like the early, like late 80s. And when I moved to, and I think I've said this story to Miss Bev before, but when I moved to New York, I grew up in the DR. I was there till I was 23. And the first time I found Miss Bev was in the Harlem, like in the library in Harlem, in the area I lived, was when I found her work. And I was reading a lot of like African American literature, just like to understand, like it's very different being a Black person where everybody's Black, as opposed to in the US. Like it's very different being Black in the Dominican Republic than it is here. It feels different. So, and I was reading like Audre Lorde and James Baldwin and all these other things, but I found in Indigo, and it was like, whoa, this is how people lived. Like everybody's telling me the history, but this is like people living. And it was really powerful for me to find Miss Bev's work, because then I had like context of not just, and of course she does such a great job, like just like documenting how she found the things that she found for her books, that it really was powerful. And it gave me like the first like, oh, okay, so this is a thing that I can write. Like I could write historical that has brown people. Like both those things can happen. So it was like mind blowing. Of course, it took me like another 13 years to actually write
it's okay.
historical, but it was, I mean, it's just like the power of representation. Also what you can learn from a romance novel, because I was trying very hard to understand American life for people of color at that time. And Miss Bev's books gave me like happy endings as I was learning about like African American life in the US. So thank you, Miss Bev.
You're very welcome, baby.
That's the power of romances, that you can, or historical romances, that you can see people just living their lives in these different time periods, but also how they overcome everything and how we look at history with our present, point of view, but they don't know what it looks like now. So being able to see how they live their lives and how they deserve to have happily ever afters. My next question is, research is a huge part of historical romance. How do you balance your research with writing your character stories?
Not very well for me. I go down rabbit holes and spend hours. Then I think, oh, this is a good idea for the next book. Then I, gather all that research, and so it's hard for me, honestly. Yeah, it's easy for me, and I think for probably not to get sucked in, because things that have happened in history are more outlandish, more fabulous than you can have imagined. and it's hard not to get pulled into some of those stories. And as a journalist, I end up using a lot of, I think the journalist in me ends up using a lot of these stories to sort of inspire my books. And so quite a few of my books have been inspired by true life stories. So
I think it's super funny when people are like, oh, those words didn't exist. And, you know, every historical romance author goes, hang on a second. Let me show you this lexicon dictionary from the 1300s and said this word existed. You know, for me, I think it's just to balance not overcoming the romance with the historical details. I mean, everybody writes differently. I like to have a little bit of tidbits here and there, whether they're side characters or places that are, you know, authentic to where I'm writing. And also, you know, I mean, I do the author's note like Diana talked about, just to make sure that all my stuff is there. Here's where my research is. Here's what I found out when I went digging. And I think that's important because it kind of tells people, you know, we're just opening up this learning to everybody. You read a great romance novel and the end of it, you're like, oh, I want to go, you know, look and see where this author, you know, found these details or, you know, or got this plot or had this character of color.
It's too bad that we have to prove it with, because other authors don't have to prove it with the note in the back.
I have a 2-week moratorium. So any odd fact, like I have done a deep dive on buttons. Okay. We all know this is going to be one sentence.
Yeah, right.
Somewhere in the book, right? But I'm in a deep dive of buttons and, oh, they were painted buttons. Well, what kind of paint was the buttons and how were they manufactured? How did they decide what was on the button? Who saw it? What's 2 weeks? That's it. And anybody who thinks about writing, screenshot, capture it, get the bibliography note. You will never find it again.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, where was that? And that'll save you from using up your 2-week moratorium on something that you've already researched. So always screenshot. You'll never find it again. Screenshot it, Kinko it, download it, buy the book, whatever it is, you do it. But I do 2 weeks because that's where you know you're going to just go in there.
I can't do 2 weeks. You know, you get one night, that's it. Because, you know, I tell this story about, you know, chasing frog sounds one night for Rebel and wound up going down the rabbit hole and here and there and bumped into a black guy who owned a circus. So it's like, okay, well, forget the frog sounds. Now I want to know about, you know, him. So, you know, going down the rabbit hole, you end up in places that you had no idea you were going to wind up in. And then, like you said, you know, when you do find what you want, you're only going to use 2 sentences. You know, you've got this whole 9-page essay of the black guy in the circus, you know, and you wind up using. But I love the research. Adriana?
It's hard to balance that 'cause for me, like, and also I think it's like new stuff, right? Like this is none of this we learned in any kind of like education scenario. So for me to know that the Dominican Republic and 13 other Latin countries were at the 1889 World's Fair, and there's like documentation for each of the pavilions that they built with all the details of the architects and what they had in them and what they were showing and who was there. Like I could have literally spent, which I did, like a year just like looking at stuff because like, it's just amazing to even know these things that we never had any clue about. So it's like, that's the part that I find hard. Like for myself, it's also like exciting. And then I can use like 3 words. Like I have so much information about this Mexican pavilion that they had in this exposition, like literally just pages and pages of it. And I was like, 1 sentence in the book.
But 1 authentic sentence.
Right. But you save it for, you know, you save it for another project.
Another book. Adriana,
save it for another project. Yeah. But, you know, my thing is, you know, You want to put all that information in the book. Because, you know, historical writers, we're like, okay, we want to do this, 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 this. And you read it and you edit, and your eyes start glazing over. And you're like, okay, this is too much. I got to cut this stuff. No matter how beautiful the sentences are and, you know, how germane they are to, you can't use it. So, because you only need that one sentence. So you save it for another project.
It's amazing. What advice would you give to someone that would like to get started in writing historical romance?
Read historical romance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Read a lot. Read a lot. Understand
Read
it.
a lot.
And then see where you think you could add to it, or what niches for you. And there's so many different parts of romance, so many different subgenres.
Yeah.
But yeah, read.
Also, if you think something's already been written, that doesn't mean anything. Your voice is something that's going to make it different.
Yeah. And don't go into it saying, well, you're scared. Because, you know, when I was coming up in romance and I'd talk to authors and they said, well, I don't want to do, you know, historicals because they're hard. Writing's hard. This ain't easy out here. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to, well, Adriana has written that, or Amelie has written that, like you said, or Vanessa has written that. You have a unique story. You have a unique voice. Don't be scared. You know, just do your thing. There's an audience waiting for the story that you can spin in a way that only you can spin it. So, you know, come join us on a panel next year, you know.
By now, the lashing and the whipping has already occurred.
Yeah.
The people you see on the screen have taken the brunt of all the naysayers, of the abuse, the never happened, yada, yada, yada. It's already, but there's no reason for you to be scared anymore.
Right.
Just come on into the water. We're here. It's fine.
Yeah.
Just bring your bibliography and join us.
Yeah, we'll keep you from drowning.
And your author's note.
Yeah. We'll
Join
keep you
us.
from drowning.
Do you have a favorite book that you've written? If you can narrow it down, or you don't have to.
Everybody
My
looks
favorite
around.
is my favorite, I think, because personally, and you know, it's my own little thing, is that it's perfectly balanced with everything. It's something like love. Okay.
It's on my shelf. That's my
You're so silly.
I'm sorry. I've got an unforgettable shelf, and that's my book, and that's right there.
For me, it's a perfect book. But you know, I'm prejudiced, so you know. Yeah. Perfect book.
For me, it is actually An Earl, the Girl, and a Toddler. Everybody wants to write an amnesia book.
I don't. I don't.
Oh, you probably forgot that you want to write an amnesia book.
Yeah, that's true.
But this one, it's the first time it was my second Black hero. But I advanced him all the way to an Earl. So I've been taking I went to a Baron. So, but I did rich folk, then I did a Baron, and now bam, I got an Earl. So you know what's coming up next, guys. But
so silly.
It's to me, this hero is my husband. He is my brother, all my brothers, because he's funny. He's trying to do things right, but something always goes slightly awry. And he loves this toddler. This is his adopted daughter so heavily that it makes me weepy thinking about the relationships, because I like to bring in other relationships, not just because it's a I wouldn't say a family romance, but it's to see a Black man being that open, in this Regency genre, to me, was very special. And like I said, this is my husband, this is my three brothers, and how they are with their kids. And I just, it's a very special book. So I know we're gonna go off the top.
I'm super shallow and like the books that I'm writing at the moment and that I haven't edited 50 times because then I don't like them that much. So the cover I'll show is like this cover because it's so, the representation on it is incredible. I love this book. I love, all my books is representation on that one. This hot brown man, hot West Indian Duke. Who doesn't want some of that? Come on. Yeah, so shallow.
No. Gotta sell your pizza, girl, not shallow.
So for me, I think it's the series I just completed. It was my first series featuring characters of Arab descent. And I think for that reason, it's I don't know, maybe the first one, Her Night with the Duke, but really all three of them. And of course, I didn't get a copy of my book. Of course I should, right? But, so this is the last one in the series. In this case, the hero is Arab, and I made sure they kept his hair, hairy arms, because that's,
Yeah,
very representative.
nice.
But I think it's my favorite series because I think it's most meaningful. I've never seen, and forgive me if they exist, I don't mean to insult anybody, I've never seen Arab characters as the heroes and heroines. And the mail I've gotten, the email, the feedback on social that I've gotten from people who are like, oh my God, I've never seen myself in a book. People come up at sign. Well, I've only had one, but at a recent signing, a couple of young brown women came up to me and said, your books are just to see ourselves on the page has really meant a lot. So
Awesome.
I think that's why. It's not because the stories are necessarily better, but I think they're good. I think it's because what they represent to people who've never seen themselves on the page.
Yeah, I've only written the one. I'm writing the second one. So, I've written a historical novella. So, I guess Eris is going to have to be my favorite. Although I am really into this new book that I'm writing. It's the second book in the series because it is a queer romance and it's two Latinas. The first book, A Caribbean Heiress in Paris, which was a dream to even be able to write it. She was Latina. He was an earl. He was a Scottish earl, but just to be able to like pack in just like that much Latin culture into a historical is just really great. And so I'm enjoying that a lot.
Awesome.
So there's a vast range of time periods represented here. But are there any particular periods that you're hoping to explore in future books or you're currently writing that you're allowed to talk about?
Sure.
There are enough stories between 1750 and 1830. I'm gonna be here forever. I ain't moving, Now, that being said, the proper inducement may make me move. However, there's so many stories that we haven't even scratched the surface yet that need to be told.
Yeah,
I'm happy. 1750 to 1850.
I like writing what I'm comfortable with too, because I know the era. It's a lot of learning, especially because you get asked. I think Diana touched on this earlier. We get asked to kind of prove where we did the research, and it's a lot to learn. So it's kind of like in my comfort zone to stay in Victorian or the Regency era, and especially writing like BIPOC historical romance novels. With the colonial domination of narratives and silenced non-Western stories. Those have made our perspectives invisible. So I think it's important to kind of show that we weren't invisible. Adriana talked before about being from the Caribbean. I'm also from the Caribbean, but my background is Indian, Middle Eastern, French Creole, Chinese. Like it's completely mixed. And my history was, I grew up in a country where being brown was a majority race. And then I moved to the United States when I was 18. And it's a minority race, and it was a hard adjustment learning about different backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities, how pieces work together. And I feel like, the more stories we see, regardless of the time period in history, the better it's going to be for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's why, to your first question, what advice would you give to, someone writing historical romance? Please, please, please write your stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's the piece, right? Like there's like a million regencies or Victorians about like white people doing a certain thing. Like we're just getting started. Like we have so many stories, like just between like the 1860s and the 1890s in the Caribbean. Like it was such a like it was a time in history where like the world was very global, and the movement of people from the Americas to Europe and back was enormous.
Huge.
And so
Huge.
there was such a presence of Latin and Afro-Caribbean people in different parts of the world that I could literally like write a million books. Like just like even like I'm like this next book that in the series, she's Mexican, but like her great grandfather was like from the US and like escaped slavery, because a lot of people escaped from slavery and came to Mexico, specifically to Veracruz, which is like in the Yucatan Peninsula. And just like that culture, like you could write, I could literally like any person from that part of the world could literally write 100 books.
Yep. We've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I feel I don't mean to interrupt you, Miss Bev, if you're
No, go ahead, girl. Go ahead.
I already, like the first series I did with authors of color, with characters of color, was Regency, because that's what my previous books were all in. That's a time period I knew and I loved. But because it was so hard to find enough information about Arabs in the Regency, I moved. The new series is in like 1880, 1890s, because I could find a lot more research, many more original sources. And I wanted to have that. I wanted to lend that authenticity. I can't have all my characters be, from Manchester cotton merchants. I can't. I have to move it around a little. So, and so the next ones are in the 1880s. And I may go to modern day, but I think I may try experiment around. But I think I'm going to stay with characters, at least some characters of Arab origin, because I'd like to see more of that on the market.
Yeah. And Diana, we have a writer in the Detroit area named Sage Spelling. I don't know if you know about Sage or not.
They've mentioned her in the chat.
Yep.
Yeah, and she's been trying. She's a great writer, and she's from the Middle East, and
yep, she's awesome.
So yeah, she's awesome.
Well, we'll have
so it'd be nice if you two could hook up.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Sage Spelling. Yeah.
Diana, you also need to remember Duke math. There were only 28 Dukes in the Regency, but over 10,000 books have been written. Okay? 10,000 books. So if you find one Arab woman doing something fantastic, that's 328 books.
Yeah, exactly.
Do not fall into that trap.
Don't forget to add in great teeth.
Right. Yeah.
No, I know, but I love to have some research to sort of help inform, and it also motivates me and inspires me. But yes, you're absolutely right, 100%.
Yeah. Because once again, our stories, our history is being uncovered, and so we're still needing more scholarship. The French took many of the archives from Haiti when they left.
Yeah.
Some of that has been opened up, some of it hasn't. There's so much that needs to be uncovered. We need our historians in the colleges and universities to continue to open up doors, translate materials for us. So once again, don't fall into the trap of, okay, I wrote that one book based on that one person. No, 300 books for every single person you find.
There you go.
There are people.
I like that policy.
There are people whose stories have been hidden, not written down, or even in some cases they will describe them differently. There was just the cousin who had suntan skin.
Yeah. But I mean, identity is so nuanced, it's so complex, so broad. Like, I mean, you could, like you said, you could have those 300 stories, but they're going to be meaningful because representation isn't relatability, right? I mean, we're like Miss Bev, I was on a panel with you earlier this year or last year, and you said we're not a monolith, and that's so true. It's always stuck with me. We're just not. It's too broad.
Yeah.
It's identity. Human
Yeah.
identity is too complex.
Right. Yeah. Especially when you're involved in race.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean,
Especially when you're involved in race. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Adriana.
No, I was just gonna say, like, the Caribbean, basically, like, from 1493 was basically Grand Central Station. Like, everybody was
Yeah.
going through the Caribbean, like Hispaniola specifically, like where Dominican Republic and Haiti are. Like, everything was going through us. So it was like a huge Arab community. There's like Asian community. There's so many, because everyone was passing through, because there was like only a few places where there were cities in that part of the world. And so to think that you could like whittle that down to like one particular thing, it's impossible, because there was just so much traffic in that part of the world at that time.
And we did everything. We did everything from the top to the bottom. You know, we were ship owners, we were ship builders, we were, you know, don't get me started. I'll be here all day. You know, we made
opera
hats.
singers. Okay, there's
Right.
opera singers
Right.
in Santa
And-
Domingue.
Yeah.
And milliners and seamstresses and, you know,
Yes.
people who were architects and, you know, that, you know, because, you know, those architects in the South are what built those mansions. So you're not limited, or don't be limited by the limiting history that's on the books now, because there were no limits back then. You know, somebody had to do the work, and we were the ones doing it. So, you know, we did all the work.
So once again, you are all freed. You're absolved. Duke math reigns. 300
Yeah.
books. You find anything. 300 books.
I know. So it's all about what we all call edutainment. Entertainment, education. You know? It's all about that.
I will forever be using Duke math.
I know.
I love that.
How do you create your protagonist or your cast of characters and balance it with like 21st century points of view?
Mine just show up and tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey girl, can you write a story?" And I'm like, "Oh God, who are you?" You know. But we all deal with it differently.
You know, sometimes I've watched movies. I was watching 3 Men and a Baby, and I was like, what would that look like in the Regency? Hence, a Duke, the Lady, the Baby, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, the struggles we have now are the struggles of the past. They just look a little different. They fit different sets of rules, and so you think about what you're passionate about. And that sometimes will become a story. And then you have to have a set of characters that are three-dimensional. So they have to have real goals, something they're striving for. You know, the goal to be in love is not a goal. That's a wish. You need an actual tangible thing that you could see progress on. You know, I personally believe everyone has a lie they grow up with. And how you change, how you heal from this lie, that adds another dimension to the storytelling. So, you know, everybody approaches it differently.
Like Vanessa, I mean, same thing. Like my last book was, you know, Pretty Woman meets Center Stage, right? So, I mean, you'll look at a movie and be like, oh, what would this be like in this period? So totally, I do that too. And then others like the inclusive BIPOC romance series, you know, it's based on actual people. So like I said, Sophia Duleep Singh was the inspiration for the first book. And she was, you know, an Indian princess, and I wanted to write about a heroine that was similar to her. The second book is inspired by Dido Elizabeth Bell. with except a male hero instead of a female. And then my last book was inspired by Mary Bowser, who was like a Black Union spy. You hear about Elizabeth Van Lew, who she worked for because she was white, but you don't hear about her. And she was incredible. And again, all of that is in my author's note. So yay.
Yeah.
And I feel, and again, like I think, I'm thinking about this book that I'm writing now, and it's just so much about like how much women have to fight for like their space in the world, and that's like something that feels like really relevant right now. And so I can pretty much use all the rage that I'm feeling right now from like everything that's happening in the world and just like put it in this book that I'm writing. And it's, about like how women are like objectified and underestimated and looked over and all these other things, and just kind of put it in there. Like the third book in the series I'm planning is like I already had planned it heavily about like reproductive rights and like just reproductive justice in general during that time, which was a huge deal, and all the work that women of color did to provide access to women's health, contraception, and all these other things. And it just feels really important right now to talk about that in books.
Yeah.
And so, like, unfortunately, humans aren't great at learning from the lessons of the past. So we can really like use a lot of the conversations that are happening now to like orient us and like give us like the dialogue and the energy and all the motivation that we need for those characters. Because
and the agency, totally.
Yeah.
I think also you can't, writing in the time periods that most of us write in, you do have to balance it with a modern perspective, because that's what the reader expects. So you do have to temper it, bring those values, bring the mores that might have been in place, but in a way, your hero and heroine have to buck the system in a way to be appealing to the modern reader. That is something that I struggle with, and my editors have said, that might not appeal to the readers. So,
listen, my characters bathe every day. Okay, I'm just gonna say that they bathe every day. They weren't supposed to bathe the 1800s.
Because sometimes
they bathe like once a month. Come on.
Right? Yeah, because sometimes what happened then is not going on now. It's and sometimes people who think they're experts in that period are not. So a lot of times when you get that, you just sort of, okay, and then go ahead and write what you want to write anyway, because it's your book. Okay.
That's awesome. And I see we have some questions, so I didn't want to miss those. The first question is for Miss Bev. Will there be more movies made from your books?
I don't know. We've been waiting for different, entities to quote unquote get their shit together. And so far, nothing's happened, but we got a lot of interest. Let's put it that way. I will always be forever grateful to Iris Bowling and Siri Austin, her company, for doing Deadly Sexy. So if anybody has not seen that, it is on Amazon Prime still. Deadly Sexy, the movie. So we're hoping. It is great. She did a damn good job. Even though she made that film with rubber bands and buttons and Coke cans and all of that, because we didn't raise enough money, but
that's on Prime.
Amazon Prime, yeah. Great. Deadly Sexy, the movie. So yeah. So my answer to your question is, we hope so. We hope we're going to get something soon, and if not, it's okay. We still got the books. I'm gonna keep writing, so I'm not gonna worry about that. Okay.
And for everyone, what out of the box history? Where did that question go? What out of the box history and color stories would you write, even if it was under a pseudonym?
I think really what we all write is out of the box, right?
Right.
In a lot of ways. So we're sort of writing them already.
Yeah. And historical is too hard to use a pseudonym. I want people to know it was me.
Yeah. Girl, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
She's intentional, boys and girls. Intentional.
They can know I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my real name, people.
Mhm.
That's my real name.
Mine is not, because when I started writing, I didn't imagine that you could use an ethnic Arabic name and get
Yeah.
published. And I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
So when I decided to write, so it is, Diana Quincy is not my real name.
Yeah.
It's, I thought it sounded like a very romancy name. And I like it. And so when I decided to write a series with characters of Arab origin, I mean, we sort of had that discussion about, do I write under another name? And we said no, because I already had some audience as Diana Quincy, and it doesn't matter. I don't think that much. I mean, it's a shame not to have that ethnic representation on the cover of the book, but
You got the cover.
I'm okay.
Awesome.
It's okay. People sometimes people need to use pseudonyms. So it's no shame in your game, my dear. No shame in your game.
Amelie Howard is my real name, but I never use my first name. I use my family back home knows my first name, which is Reshma, but I don't use that in my books. Amelie is my middle name, which is interesting because my husband and everybody in the United States knows me as Amelie. So weird, split personality.
Yeah. Oh, they're kicking us out.
I know. I feel like we're in our kitchen. I like it.
Yeah, we're just getting started here.
Oh well.
Yeah, this was a fantastic panel.
Yeah.
This is fun. This was fun.
And I recommend to everyone, if you haven't read the author's books, go get them all. And fall in love with all their characters. So I'm going to end the broadcast. And again, thank you to all the authors.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
It was awesome.
You ladies are wonderful and amazing, and I missed you all in person. So
thanks for moderating, Christine. You did a great job.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. Bye.